An American company is installing oil drilling machines in central Mongolia, but things don't go according to plan. Equipment often breaks down, and the project might get closed. The manager named Patrick is in charge of everything. The man is nervous about what is happening. Patrick and a worker named Talai have a secret. They want to quietly take out some cargo from the factory, but the authorities should not know about it. For now, Patrick orders one of the workers to stay outside and fix the pump. The worker hears strange noises behind him. Suddenly, a huge worm bursts out of the ground. It swallows the man and crawls back, leaving a large hole in the ground. The next day, a treasure hunter named Daniel tries to escape by car from a gang of local thugs. The bandits almost manage to lure the guy into a trap, but then a police car drives up to the scene. The thugs threaten Daniel but leave soon after. The guy chats with a policeman named Timur. It turns out that Daniel has been excavating in Mongolia for 6 years, and finally he has found the right clues. The leader of a local gang named Colin is afraid that Daniel will not share the treasure with him, so sometimes he sends bandits to scare the guy. Timur asks Daniel to be careful. Meanwhile, in the Mongolian village of Sepigil, an epidemic of a strange disease similar to cholera flares up. This is due to contaminated water. The patients are cared for by doctors from the Doctors of Hope organization. An elderly Mongolian woman suffering from cholera says that huge underground worms are to blame. A doctor named Steffi does not believe in the existence of these mythical creatures. The medicines are running out and Steffi is waiting for the arrival of 2 other doctors with medicines. These doctors are named Alicia and Philip. Their car broke down halfway to the village. Police officer Timur drives up to the doctors, but he is not ready to give them a lift to Sepigil, as he is in a hurry, responding to a call from another village. Daniel drives by. Timur stops the guy and asks him to take the doctors to Sepigil. At first, Daniel does not agree, because he needs to do excavations. But then he realizes that doctors can be asked for money for travel. Alicia and Philip reluctantly pay Daniel and get into his car. At the oil depot, workers begin to disappear. Talai discovers a deep hole in the ground and reminisces about the worms from Mongolian legends. Locals believe that the monsters were awakened by the oil company's drilling machines. Patrick does not believe in these stories, but he is annoyed that rumors about the disappearance are spreading, and the workers are starting to strike. Immediately, corporate boss Mr. Bixler arrives at the base. Because of this, Patrick is even more nervous, because he and Talai did not have time to take out the secret cargo from the basement. However, Patrick goes to give Bixler a tour. During the rounds, Bixler doesn't understand why things are going so badly. The enterprise works as follows. Pumps supply hot water to the mine. The water melts the permafrost underground and reaches the shale. After cleaning the substance from clay, the company receives crude oil, which it sells. But ever since Patrick took over here, the water pumps keep failing. Because of this, the corporation can go bankrupt. Patrick explains that every day his workers go missing and equipment breaks down due to electrical interference of unknown origin. The working Mongols explain these oddities by the awakening of huge worms. While the men are talking, a small earthquake occurs. Soon alarmed Bixler nevertheless decides to take a rest. Taking advantage of his absence, Patrick and Talai continue to look for ways to quickly sell their cargo to smugglers. Evening comes. Daniel and the doctors don't get to Sepigil in time as the car stalls. Daniel explains that the engine needs to cool down a little to continue the ride. In addition, the local roads cannot be traveled during darkness, as smugglers travel along them. Alicia is unhappy with this decision, but she has to obey. The company settles around the fire. Alicia soon softens and asks Daniel for forgiveness for her harsh words. After joking and exchanging pleasantries, the guy shows Alicia a device that measures the fluctuations of the electric field and acts as a metal detector. This device will help Daniel find the treasure. At this time, several cars appear near the clearing. Philip thinks that good people came to save them, but Daniel understands what a mess they are in. Bandits, who obey Colin, come out of the cars. The thugs grab the whole company and put them in cars. Already in the morning they arrive at the smugglers' camp and forcibly push the captives into Colin's tent. Daniel tries to convince the bandits that their treasure-sharing agreement is still in effect, but Colin does not believe him. He beats the guy and suspects that Alicia and Phil are his accomplices. After that, Colin orders his men to take the doctors to another tent and tie them up. Daniel remains under interrogation. Meanwhile, Bixler returns to base and complains about the terrible connection. He was never able to contact his superiors in America to report the problem. Bixler decides to check the base's foundations as he senses that Patrick is hiding something from him. Patrick flatly refuses to let the boss into the basement. He screams and insists on going back to his office and looking at all the reports. But Bixler is adamant. Then Patrick grabs his gun and prepares to threaten the boss with it. However, at that moment, Talai comes running and reports that America has connected. Patrick hides the gun and breathes a sigh of relief. At the smugglers' camp, Daniel's interrogation is finally over. He is tied up and brought to Alicia and Phil's tent. Daniel admits to the doctors that all this time he was looking for the grave of Genghis Khan, and those same worms are its guards. Daniel has already seen worms with his own eyes. It turns out that if worms really exist, then the grave of Genghis Khan is quite real. Daniel feels he is closer than ever to finding his dream. The guy takes out a knife from his boot and frees his and the doctor's hands from the ropes. He then tells the doctors how to get back to his car and drive to Sep Eagle. Daniel himself promises to cover the departure of Alicia and Phil, and then get to Sep Eagle on his own. Daniel grabs a gun and sneaks out of the tent. He hides behind a car and keeps an eye on the gang members. Daniel shoots at one of them. The others immediately grab their guns and start shooting back. Taking advantage of the general confusion, the doctors run out of the tent and steal the smuggler's car. Daniel is still in danger, but then a lot of giant worms crawl into the clearing. They swallow the thugs, leaving only Daniel alive. He shoots at the fuel tanks, and the whole camp is blown into the air along with the worms. Daniel himself runs into the woods. Alicia and Phil get to Daniel's car. The car won't start, so they load the medicine into the smuggler's pickup truck. Alicia worries about Daniel, wants to return to the camp and save the guy, but Phil reminds them that they are awaited by the sick in Sep Eagle. Then the doctors leave. Soon Daniel also manages to run to his car. Immediately, giant worms attack him. Fortunately, the car starts. The guy runs over one worm and goes to Sep Eagle. The doctors arrive in the village and meet with Steffi. She reports that the disease has spread throughout the village. Alicia examines the sick in the hospital and orders to get as much distilled water as possible. One of the patients says that the disease spreads so quickly because the water is poisoned by worms. Steffi just brushes it off, but Alicia and Phil take it seriously. At the oil depot, a connection finally appears. Bixler calls his superiors and tries to report problems. He wants to achieve a second study of the soil on the territory of the base. Patrick does not need this at all, so he rudely cuts off Bixler's conversation and points a gun at the boss. He then ties Bixler's hands, but doesn't know what to do next. The smugglers that Patrick is waiting for are the same Kalana gang. The worms have already dealt with them, but Patrick does not know anything about this, so he continues to wait and is nervous. Daniel comes to Sep Eagle. He is nice to Alicia and wants to help sick people. Locals report that there is an oil depot nearby. There are definitely telephones and an evacuation vehicle. Daniel is ready to go there. Alicia follows him. She does not trust the guy and wants to control everything. Daniel asks everyone else to stay inside and not go outside unless absolutely necessary. Of course, it's all about giant worms, but the guy prefers not to talk about it so as not to scare people. Patrick takes Bixler to the basement, ties him to a chair, and covers his mouth with duct tape. He leaves Bixler alone and runs to Talai. He reports that the smugglers have disappeared somewhere. Now no one will help them to transport the valuable cargo across the border. Patrick decides to move all the boxes from the warehouse to a safe place as soon as possible. A young worker named Banna remains in charge of the base, since no one else went to work. Patrick and Talai load the first container into the car and leave the base. On their way to the oil depot, Daniel and Alicia see an empty car in the middle of the road, and underneath it is a piece of a worm. Alicia wonders why no one in the world knows about the existence of these monsters. Daniel's device shows that the worms are emitting an electrical impulse, causing telephones and walkie-talkies in the area to stop working. Alicia takes a sample of the worm's innards. She wants to analyze and see if the worms are related to the epidemic in Sep Eagle. After that, friends continue on their way to the base and soon arrive there. A small earthquake takes place. Alicia doesn't understand why build a facility on a plate fault where earthquakes can occur. But before there were no faults. So something strange has happened here in the last few months. Friends enter the base. Immediately, Banna points a gun at Daniel's face. Alicia says that she is a doctor who came to Sep Eagle to save the sick. Banna lowers his weapon, because he himself comes from Sep Eagle. Suddenly, a huge worm appears at the entrance to the building, and Banna lets the friends into the base without any hesitation. He leads Alicia to the phone, but there is no connection. Banna talks about how oil is produced here. Due to the fact that a lot of hot water was constantly pumped underground, the underground glacier melted. This brought the ancient ringworms out of hibernation. Now it becomes clear why no one has seen the worms before. And after drilling, they got out. If the drilling process stops, the worms will stop waking up and crawling out of the ground. Those worms that have already hit the surface will live no more than a week. This means that the enterprise must be stopped immediately. This will stop the cholera epidemic. Daniel understands everything and insists that Banna stop the work of the plant. Remembering the sick people in Sep Eagle, Banna decides to act. Daniel and Banna go downstairs to the control valves, while Alicia stays in the office and tries to get through to the authorities. Bixler sits alone in the basement and tries to free himself. Then he hears a roar and a loud growl. Soon the man sees a huge worm that slowly slides down the column towards him. The worm releases an ugly tongue right in front of Bixler's face. In another part of the basement, Daniel and Banna find valves and try to close them to stop the drilling. On the second attempt, the men succeed. After that, Daniel hears a crash. He goes to the source of the sound, while frightened Banna runs upstairs. Meanwhile, in Sep Eagle, Phil and a nurse walk to the well for water. The girl lowers the bucket into the well and immediately falls there with a cry. Phil panics and calls for help. Steffi comes running, but she doesn't have time to help the nurse, as several disgusting worms crawl out of the well. Doctors run screaming to the hospital. Patrick and Talai return to base. They understand that someone stopped the work of the Enterprise. Bana runs towards them. He screams that you need to leave this terrible place. Using a gun, a distraught Patrick stops the guy from leaving. Alicia manages to get through to Timur and inform him about the disaster in Sep Eagle. The policeman immediately goes there. Patrick and Talai enter the office. Now Alicia is in trouble. Timur drives up to the hospital in Sep Eagle and sees a lot of worms on the walls of the building. With the help of a rifle, the brave policeman quickly cracks down on the monsters outside the hospital. After that, he goes inside and protects the frightened people from the worms. Daniel enters the basement and realizes that he has entered the very tomb of Genghis Khan, which he has been looking for 6 years. The man looks around and cannot believe that someone else has achieved the goal of his whole life. Daniel sees the place where Bixler was sitting before the encounter with the worm. The bound man did not survive. Also in the basement arrive the armed Patrick and Talai, who holds a knife to Alicia's neck. Patrick demands that Daniel lower his weapon. The guy doesn't resist. Patrick lets slip that he found the treasures of Genghis Khan and tried to illegally take them to America. That was his secret. Daniel tries to divert Patrick's attention and points to the chair Bixler was sitting on. Taking advantage of Patrick's confusion, Daniel pounces on him and takes the gun away. He wounds the enemy in the shoulder. Suddenly an earthquake starts. The basement walls are crumbling and worms are crawling out everywhere. Talai releases Alicia, and he himself is swallowed by a worm of incredible size. Patrick and Daniel stop the fight and run from the basement in different directions. Daniel realizes that the biggest worm is the queen who guards Genghis Khan's tomb. Meanwhile, help arrives in Sep Eagle. Now Timur goes to the oil depot to save Daniel and Alicia. On his way out of the factory, Daniel notices a warehouse full of crates. They store the jewels. He considers them and makes a difficult decision: to blow up the base along with the treasures. It's the only way to get rid of the worms. Immediately Patrick runs up to them with a gun. He can't let the base explode. Timur also rushes to the warehouse and threatens Patrick with a weapon. Patrick screams that all the treasures are his. But from behind him, the Queen of Worms silently approaches him. She swallows Patrick and goes into the basement. The rest run to the compartment with valves. Daniel and Alicia turn the valves to the maximum, creating an emergency. Any minute now, the plant will explode. Friends get out of the basement, trying to fight off the worms. Timur fails to survive, but Daniel and Alicia run outside. A few seconds later, the factory explodes along with the worms and treasure. Friends fall to the ground, fleeing the debris. Daniel and Alicia manage to survive. Suddenly, the treasures of Genghis Khan begin to fall on them, which Daniel has been looking for so long. Friends laugh happily at such a pleasant surprise. Afterwards, Daniel brings Alicia to Sep Eagle. She needs to supervise the evacuation of the sick. Daniel plans to return to the oil depot and collect the jewels. He promises to donate part of the money to the Doctors of Hope organization. Daniel walks up to Alicia and places the fair money in her pocket, telling her that the ride was free. Young people say goodbye in the hope of a new meeting.